Hello, I'm Ed Chapman, and this video cast is going to explain respiration. Now, it would be a very good idea to go and listen to or watch the video cast on photosynthesis before you do this one, because we're going to be referencing photosynthesis in a couple different places. Now, all cells do respiration, and cells do respiration because they have to get energy from the food that they have to run their metabolism. And you should remember that metabolism is another name for all the chemistry that cells do to stay alive. The chemistry of building things, the chemistry of taking apart things, all these chemical reactions usually assisted by enzymes. You need energy to do that, and that energy is coming from respiration. If a cell uses oxygen to perform respiration, we say that's an aerobic process, or we call it cellular respiration. If cells don't need oxygen, then we call it anaerobic respiration, or another name called fermentation. The word fermentation has been used for a very long time, even before people understood what was really happening inside of cells when things ferment. Now, all forms of respiration produce ATP. ATP is the energy molecule that is carrying tiny little packets of energy into chemical reactions so that they can happen. And ATP is the molecule that does this. It powers the metabolism of all living cells. If a cell runs out of ATP, it's going to die. So that means cells have to constantly make ATP. Now, if you remember, ATP is a molecule that contains 3 phosphate groups. That's what the T in ATP means. And these molecules are attached to larger molecules. In this diagram, you can see there's a green part and a gray part. Don't worry about what they mean for this part of the class. If ATP is used to power a chemical reaction, it's going to give up some of its energy and become ADP. And you'll notice when this happens, one of the phosphate groups come off. So 3 minus 1 equals 2, or die. So that's what the D in ADP stands for. So if ADP has lost one of its phosphate groups, it's also lost a tiny bit of energy. And this energy can be used to either generate body heat or to make a chemical reaction happen. Sometimes you can talk about ADP as like a partially charged battery or a drained battery, and ATP is like the fully charged form of the molecule, or a fully charged battery. Now, here's the chemical reaction for aerobic respiration, and if you remember photosynthesis, you can see that the reactants and the products are switched. In aerobic respiration, the reactants are sugar and oxygen, and the products are carbon dioxide and water. And you also get, as we said earlier, the whole purpose for doing aerobic respiration is to make ATPs. So if you have oxygen available and can do aerobic respiration, you can get about 36 ATPs from every glucose molecule. Now, most of the time, aerobic respiration takes place inside of special organelles called mitochondria. And mitochondria contain the chemicals and the compartments for making all this complicated chemistry take place. So in order to do Let me click all these through so you can see them. In order to do aerobic respiration, a mitochondria needs to take in food or sugar, oxygen, do its chemistry, and produces a waste product, carbon dioxide and water. And you get your 36 ATPs. All right, so remember we have our 2 waste products, carbon dioxide and water vapor, and our 2 reactants that go in, glucose and oxygen. Now, if you do anaerobic respiration, otherwise known as fermentation, there are 2 kinds of anaerobic respiration. There is the kind that makes ethanol and the kind that makes lactic acid. This chemical reaction that we can see here is producing ethanol. Ethanol is a 2-carbon molecule that is made from glucose molecules, and the chemistry of that we're not really going to worry too much about. You just need to know that when fermenters do anaerobic respiration to make ethanol, they also release carbon dioxide bubbles, and you get about 2 ATPs from this. So this is not nearly as efficient as aerobic respiration, but it still makes ATPs, and it's how many organisms actually can make their ATPs to stay alive. You may have heard that yeast, which is a type of unicellular fungus, is a fermenter. If you mix yeast with a sugary water mixture, you can ferment ethanol. That's how they commercially produce ethanol for fuels and for alcoholic beverages. And the carbon dioxide can also ferment sugars in bread dough to make bread dough rise. All right, so basically people have known for thousands of years that if you mix sugar and yeast together, you get fermentation. You get alcohol and carbon dioxide bubbles. Now, lactic acid fermentation is another type of anaerobic respiration that happens, for example, in muscle cells. And in this case, you get lactic acid produced, no carbon dioxide bubbles. You get just lactic acid and a couple ATPs. And of course, you're using glucose as the reactant here. Glucose can be hooked together into chains called glycogen, which is how muscle cells store glucose, and they can do lactic acid if there's not enough oxygen around to do aerobic respiration, to make enough ATPs to keep everything going. So altogether in the big picture, if you think about ecosystems or bodies, we basically have two processes happening here. We have the producers producing food energy from sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide. They're passing that to consumers. Okay, each time energy is moved through this process, some of it's converted to heat. So we're going to be generating some heat. You can see those in the arrows here. Eventually, everything ends up with decomposers. All the dead bodies get rotted away. The process of decomposition produces carbon dioxide and water vapor and some heat, and you end up with some leftover nutrients, which can then go in to feed the producers. So I kind of like this diagram because it shows you how these things fit together. Hope you enjoyed this. Hope it helps, and thanks for listening.